I've launched rockets, built billion-dollar companies, and made decisions that changed entire industries, but none of that prepared me for the one woman I still can't forget. People think men like me move on fast, that success erases memory, that if your life is loud enough, your heart goes quiet. It doesn't. Not when someone touched a part of you no one else could reach. Not when her silence still echoes louder than the crowd. I didn't lose her in one fight. I lost her slowly, in the pauses, in the delayed replies, in the truths I kept pushing to later until later became too late. And the worst part? She didn't leave because she stopped loving me. She left because I made loving me feel lonely. I'm saying this now because I should have said it then. She was never hard to love. I was hard to be honest with. And if you've ever watched someone you love go quiet before they go gone, then you already know this pain. This isn't a flex. This isn't a headline. This is the message I never sent. To the woman who changed my life and never really left my heart. Even now, I still hear her name in silence. There are people you lose, and then there are people you never really lose, because they stay in your mind in ways time can't touch. This is for her. Not because I expect a reply, not because I think this changes anything, and not because I suddenly became the kind of man who says everything out loud at the perfect time. If anything, this is late, maybe years late. But some truths don't get smaller just because you avoid them. They wait. They sit in the background of your life while you build companies, break records, make headlines, solve impossible problems. And then one quiet night, they step forward and remind you that none of that erased what you felt. You were the woman I could never forget. That's the truth. Clean, simple, uncomfortable, real. I think people assume forgetting is automatic when your life is full. They think if a man is busy enough, successful enough, distracted enough, he can outrun memory. He can't. Not the memories that matter. I've lived inside noise for years. Deadlines, launches, pressure, public scrutiny, decisions that affect thousands of people, maybe more. I know what intensity feels like. I know what it means to have your mind pulled in 10 directions before breakfast. But even in that kind of life, there are moments that cut through everything. A certain tone of voice, a phrase someone says that sounds like you, a room with the same kind of silence we used to sit in, a song playing somewhere I wasn't paying attention to until suddenly I was. And then there you are again, not physically, not in front of me, but present enough to change the temperature of the moment. I never said this properly when it mattered. That's probably the center of everything. I said pieces, fragments, half-truths, shaped like control. I gave you the version of me that could function, not the version that was feeling too much. I thought that was strength. I thought composure was maturity. I thought if I stayed measured, stayed focused, stayed fine, then whatever this was between us would remain intact. But now I understand something I didn't understand then. Restraint can look like wisdom while actually being fear. I wasn't protecting peace. I was protecting myself from being seen in a way I didn't know how to survive. You changed me before I had language for it. That's why I couldn't explain it. Before you, I moved through relationships like I moved through problems. Identify, analyze, respond, optimize. Efficient, functional, controlled. Even when I cared in a way that stayed inside the rails. Then you showed up, and suddenly the rails didn't hold the same way. I remember how easy it was to be quiet around you. That sounds small, but it wasn't. My mind is rarely quiet. Even in stillness, it's running simulations, solving future fires, building structures no one else can see yet. But with you, there were moments where I stopped performing thought, stopped managing the moment, stopped needing to direct where the conversation was going. I could just be there. And that kind of peace is rare enough that when you feel it, you should respect it. I did not respect it enough. You were not just someone I loved. You were someone who made me aware of the parts of me I had exiled, the softer parts, the slower parts, the parts that don't produce, don't compete, don't prove anything. They just exist. I didn't know how starved those parts were until you reached them. And I also didn't know how quickly fear can follow tenderness when someone touches a place in you that you've kept hidden for too long. People think power makes you fearless. It doesn't. Sometimes it just gives you more ways to hide your fear. I hid behind work, behind urgency, behind the idea that later would always be available. Later, I'll explain. Later, I'll show up properly. Later, I'll say what I really mean. Later is a dangerous word. It sounds responsible. It sounds patient. Sometimes it's just avoidance wearing a clean suit. If I'm honest, and I'm trying to be honest now in the way I should have been then, I knew what you meant to me before I was willing to admit it. I knew in the pauses. I knew in the way I compared every room to the one where you were. I knew in how nothing fully landed if I couldn't tell you about it. Success felt louder back then, but less complete if you weren't somewhere in the frame. Even the wins had an after silence. People around me would celebrate, the world would move, headlines would do what headlines do, and then there would be this strange emptiness I could never explain. I can explain it now. I was sharing my life with the world and withholding my heart from the one person I actually wanted to be known by. I know there were moments when you needed clarity and I gave you complexity. Moments when you needed presence and I gave you reasons. Moments when you needed a simple truth and I answered like a man trying to escape consequence. I see that now. I see the cost of it. You were asking for something human, and I kept handing you strategy. You were not asking me to be perfect. You were asking me to be real. That should have been easier than it was. It wasn't, because realness, for me, meant vulnerability without control, and I didn't know how to do that without feeling like I was stepping off a cliff. There's a version of our story people would understand if I made it dramatic. If I said one thing happened, one moment broke everything, one sentence ended us. But that wouldn't be true. What changed us wasn't one explosion. It was accumulation, missed moments, delayed conversations, half-finished honesty, the emotional equivalent of a slow drift that's invisible while it's happening and obvious only after distance has formed. That's what hurts most about looking back. There were so many chances to turn toward you, so many quiet openings where one honest sentence could have changed the direction of everything. I felt them. I ignored them. I told myself timing mattered. I told myself pressure was temporary. I told myself you understood. Maybe you did understand. Maybe that's exactly why it hurt you more. I still think about your silence, not as punishment, as information. The way you stopped asking certain questions. The way your words became lighter while your eyes became heavier. The way conversations started sounding normal on the surface, but empty underneath. I noticed it, but I interpreted it through ego. I thought silence meant patience. I thought distance meant maturity. I thought if you weren't forcing the conversation, then maybe things were okay. They weren't. You were adjusting to the reality that I wasn't meeting you where you stood. You were doing what people do when they're tired of knocking on a door that never fully opens. You got quiet. And I let that quiet become our language. That's one of the things I regret most. I was better at decoding markets than I was at reading the person in front of me. I could sense risk in systems, weakness in plans, failure points in complex engineering timelines. But in the most important human connection I had, I kept missing the obvious. Or maybe I wasn't missing it. Maybe I was seeing it and refusing to name it because naming it would require action, and action would require change, and change would require me to give up the story I told myself about who I had to be. It's easier to call yourself misunderstood than to admit you were unavailable. Harder, but necessary. You were the woman I could never forget because you were the first person who made me confront the difference between being admired and being known. Admiration is easy to survive. It keeps distance. It asks for image. Being known is different. Being known means someone can see your brilliance and your blindness at the same time. They can see your ambition and your fear in one look. They can hear the confidence in your voice and still catch the exhaustion underneath it. You saw that. You saw me in a way that made performance feel useless. And instead of trusting that, I resisted it. Not because I didn't want to be loved, because I didn't know how to receive love without trying to manage it. I've replayed certain conversations more than I'd admit publicly. Not because I'm trapped in the past, but because some moments become permanent teachers. The exact way you said something. The pause before a sentence I should have taken seriously. The look that said, I'm still here, but I won't stay here forever if this keeps going. At the time, I thought we had more time. I thought important things survive delay if the feeling is strong enough. That was another mistake. Feelings are not the problem. Misalignment is. You can love someone deeply and still lose them if your actions keep contradicting your heart. Love does not fail because it was fake. Sometimes it fails because it was true but unsupported. I want to say this clearly because I never said it clearly before. You are not hard to love. You were not too much. You were not asking for impossible things. You were asking for emotional honesty, consistency, and a place in my life that matched the place you already had in my heart. Those are not unreasonable asks. They only felt heavy because I was split. Split between what I felt and what I feared. Split between wanting closeness and protecting control. Split between the life I was building and the life I was quietly longing for. A split self cannot love cleanly. It loves while bracing. It cares while calculating. It stays physically present but emotionally partial. That's what I gave you too often, partial presence. And partial presence, over time, feels like absence. There were nights after everything changed when I told myself I had made the practical choice. Keep moving, keep building, stay focused. Let time do what time does. I can do discipline. I can do momentum. I can do silence, if silence has a purpose. But this was different. This silence had no purpose. It just had weight. I'd finish a long day and there would be this moment, usually when the room finally got quiet, where the truth would come back without permission. I wasn't grieving a fantasy. I was grieving a real person, a real connection, and a version of myself I only seemed able to access when I was with you. That's a different kind of loss. It's not just losing someone else. It's losing access to a part of yourself that only existed in their presence. People romanticize memory, but memory is not always soft. Sometimes it's sharp. Sometimes it arrives like a mirror. I'd think about a moment that used to feel warm, and instead of comfort, I'd feel accountability. Not guilt in the performative sense. Accountability in the adult sense. The kind that says, you knew better in some moments, and even when you didn't know better, you could have asked better questions, listened more carefully, shown up more honestly. I'm not writing this to rewrite history and make myself the villain. I'm writing this because maturity is being able to tell the truth about your part without collapsing into self-punishment. I loved you. That was true. I mishandled what that love required. That was also true. If you ever hear this, I don't need you to forgive me for my growth to count. That's another thing I've learned. Apologies are not transactions. Reflection is not a request for re-entry. This message is not me trying to reopen something you may have already healed from. I won't disrespect your peace like that. This is me honoring reality, honoring what you meant, honoring the fact that some people become part of your moral compass long after they leave your daily life. You became one of those people for me. There are choices I make differently now, not because I became softer overnight, not because I suddenly learned balance in a perfect way, but because I can still hear the silence that formed between us when I chose delay over truth one too many times. That silence taught me something no success ever did. I understand now that love cannot survive being treated like a reward for after the mission is complete. The mission is never complete. There is always another launch, another crisis, another problem worth solving. If you put love at the end of that line, it becomes a promise to a future that never arrives. I used to think the responsible thing was to finish the urgent thing first and then return to the personal. But when your life is built on urgency, after this becomes a permanent postponement. What I should have done, what I try to do now, is tell the truth in real time, even when it's inconvenient. especially then. Because honesty delayed becomes confusion, and confusion in close relationships turns into distance faster than people realize. You changed my understanding of strength. I used to define strength almost entirely through endurance. How much pressure you can take, how much chaos you can hold, how long you can carry responsibility without breaking. That matters, but it's incomplete. There is another kind of strength, and you embodied it better than I did back then. The strength to stay emotionally honest without becoming destructive. The strength to ask for clarity without begging. The strength to leave when staying would require self-erasure. I didn't appreciate that enough when I had the chance. I do now. Maybe too late for us, but not too late for truth. I also need to say this. Thank you. Not in a small way, in a life-shaping way. Thank you for seeing me before I knew how to be seen. Thank you for your patience even when I misread it. Thank you for the conversations that made me quieter in the best way. Thank you for the moments where you made ordinary life feel more valuable than momentum. Thank you for not turning bitter, at least not in the parts I remember most. Thank you for caring honestly. In a world full of performance, honest care is one of the rarest things a person can receive. I received it from you. I did not always protect it well, but I know what it was. Maybe the hardest part of all this is that forgetting would be easier for the ego. If I forgot you, I could tell a cleaner story about myself. I could say everything happened the way it had to. I could call it timing, incompatibility, distance, circumstance, all the words people use when they want closure without accountability. But I don't want that kind of closure anymore. I'd rather carry the truth than a convenient narrative. The truth is, you mattered. The truth is, I still feel the impact of that. The truth is, some people do not become the past in a simple way. They become a line in you, a standard, a warning, a memory, a blessing. Sometimes all of it at once. I don't know what your life looks like now. I don't know who sits across from you, who gets to hear your laugh first, who gets the version of you that no longer waits for people to become ready. I hope whoever it is understands what they have. I hope they don't mistake your calm for endless patience. I hope they know that when you go quiet, it means something. I hope they answer the question underneath your words, not just the words themselves. And if you're alone, I hope it's by choice and not because someone else taught you to shrink your needs into silence. You deserve better than that. You always did. As for me, I still build. I still move fast. I still live inside systems, risk, urgency, impossible timelines. A lot of what I am hasn't changed, but something fundamental did. I don't confuse emotional distance with discipline the way I used to. I don't assume people will understand what I haven't had the courage to explain. I don't call silence stability just because conflict is uncomfortable. You taught me that unspoken things don't disappear. They shape everything. So I try, imperfectly but intentionally, to speak sooner, to be clearer, to not let fear wear the mask of logic. This message isn't a grand ending. It's not a movie speech. Life almost never gives us those. It's something quieter, a truth placed where it should have been placed long ago. You were the woman I could never forget, not because I failed to move on, but because what we had changed how I understand love, honesty, and the cost of waiting too long to say what matters. That kind of impact doesn't vanish. It becomes part of who you are. If these words never reach you, they still needed to exist. If they do, I hope they arrive without burden. I'm not asking for anything. Not a reply, not a second chance, not even understanding. I just wanted, at least once, to speak about you without hiding behind composure. To say what was true without trimming it down to something more manageable. To let the truth stand on its own. You were not a chapter I forgot. You were the line that stayed. And if there's any grace in that, it's this. Even the love we fail to hold can still teach us how to love more honestly after it's gone.